This week's episode of PokeClass is sponsored by Collector's Cash, your number one place to go for all your single cards and sealed products. Make sure you check them out after the show at www.collectorscash.com. Hey everyone, Dan here, and welcome to episode 105 of PokeClass, where today I return with some nitty-gritty statistics on the Pokemon TCG world. Now this time, we're taking a look at the State Championships results from 2013, just to see what's happening while PokeClass took a short hiatus, and see whether they'll affect the Battle Roads or Nationals format set to hit very soon. So where PokeClass left off was just before these sets of tournaments began, and just after Plasma Storm was released. It did take a while for the format to settle down a bit with the introduction of Hypnotoxic and Burbank City Gym, but I think now we have a very solid idea of where the game is heading in terms of the rest of the season. So without further ado, let's check in with the results, and first we're going to take a look at the top 4 appearances and then go through to the most winning decks and see what kind of relationship they have. Will we see a brand new best deck in format to finally knock Darkrai from the top? Let's have a look. So from the top 4 of the past 3 weeks of competition, we have a list that looks like this. Again, the array of decks that have made it all the way to top 4 is astounding compared to previous years, and people are a little skeptical as to whether this is a good thing or not, but that is for a different discussion. Anyway, in the 4th place of top 4 spots is our good friend Blastoise Keldeo. Yep, this guy is still around, and the main reason? Black Kyurem EX. Yes, okay, I know in my Plasma Storm set review I may have said this, so we're going to be skipping over the Dragon types, even though Black and White Kyurem are back in EX form, but still as trashy as the last. But it was just a joke that got a little bit out of hand. Basically, the card is really good in this deck. For the small price of including just 3 or 4 Lightning Energy in your Blastoise deck, you have the option of knocking out any EX on the field to either swing a game into your favour or completely finish a game out of nowhere. However, Black Kyurem isn't the sole reason for Blastoise still doing well, as it still is a very solid deck when set up, with its constant refresh of big hitting attackers and ability to keep rushing in to get out of laser shenanigans. So props to Blastoise for still sticking in there, and let's see what's at number 3. And here we find Rayquaza Eels, which has seen a surprising upsurge in play through the release of Plasma Storm. Now this might seem strange because the deck doesn't actually use any new cards from the new set. The great thing that Rayquaza has gained from the release of Plasma Storm is that players have pretty much stopped playing Eviolite in their lists, which means Rayquaza can just fling 3 lightning into the discard pile for a 2 prize attack as much as it likes without the need for Tool Scrapper. Another great thing about the deck is that it actually has a fairly good Klinklang matchup, as teching in fire Pokemon is extremely easy as you already run the fire energy. A regionals I went to the other day was full of both Klinklang and Rayquaza Eels, with the Rayquaza Eels running 1 or 2 of the V-Create Victini. This worked incredibly well, as even when the Klinklang player was leading the game and completely set up, if the Rayquaza Eels player could get a Victini rolling, the sweep was pretty much inevitable. Pair the double Victini with multiple Super Rods and you've got a really nice matchup against what could be a very troubling deck otherwise. The obvious risk of playing this deck is the lone Dynamo start against the likes of Mewtwo, Landorus or Tornadus, as all of these have a high chance of donking you right out of the game turn 1, and with regionals being limited to top 16 right now, even 6-2 records are missing out, so every loss really does matter now more than ever. Besides this fact, the deck is insanely strong and can make great comebacks, as it isn't affected by N too much, as it is quite self-sufficient thanks to Electric, and it can get crazy KOs no matter what the hit points. In second place we find our beloved Darkrai in a couple of variants, with one running V-Create Victini and even Victini EX. 29 Darkrai decks in total made the top 4, and the main reason for this is that its sheer speed, power and consistency. Straight Darkrai has always been known to be pretty speedy, as you can run a lot of trainers compared to the standard deck counts, but with the release of Plasma Storm, Darkrai did get better. We were at a point where we didn't think this deck could get any better, but since it can now hit for 150 damage in a single turn thanks to Laser, Dark Claw and Burbank, this deck is seriously hard to keep up with if they get some killer hands. With the ability to hit an EX and then snipe it off later on is extremely powerful and can simply win you games as your opponent struggles to keep up. And really, there isn't much left I can say about Darkrai. The guy's still good and is still staying at the top tables here, but do notice this is the second in the top 4s, so there definitely is something keeping it in check, and everything else for that matter. And this comes in the form of your first placer, Landorus Mewtwo Tornadus. This deck is now sitting pretty as our potential new best deck in format, as it hits hard, fast, and can outlive the late game too with its variety of attackers. Before Plasma Storm, Landorus was hyped through the release of Boundaries Crossed, but it never really lived up to its name, as Blastoise was at the top of the metagame at that time. However, with the release of Laser and Verbank, Landorus can now have enough firepower to take out the Squirtles before Blastoise even gets a chance to hit the field, and even if it does, the other attackers it brings with it will have something to say about it. In a nutshell, this deck takes all of the very quick attackers that can hit for 60 damage plus on the first turn when used in combination with Laser and puts them all into one deck. What isn't apparent is how many of these decks ran Bouffalant, as it can also hit for 150 damage when used in conjunction with the Laser combination, but I can imagine a few of them did. This deck actually has very solid matchups across the board by controlling Darkrai through fighting weakness, getting rid of Tynamos in any electric deck, and still keeping Blastoise in check by taking out those Squirtles before they even evolve. The only questionable matchup right now is Eels if they get past the first turn, as they can one-shot all of your attackers that don't have any energy acceleration whatsoever, while you can't really damage their Rayquazas and knock them out quick enough. This could be the main reason for the increase in Eels in play, but that doesn't mean that the matchup is unwinnable, as you do have that early game pressure advantage. So I think we have determined which decks are making the cut enough times. So how many of these are actually converting those top cuts into wins? Well, let's take a look at the final list, and this is what it looks like. And guess what? The list is exactly the same for the top 4 amount of winners, which is awesome. This means that we have a very solid idea right now as to which decks are consistently making it, not only to the important top cut places, but taking the entire tournament. However, this does mean that there isn't really much to analyze when it comes to the best decks, but let's have a look at the 3 other decks that won some of these huge events, and these are Plasmaclang, Landorus Mewtwo with Garbodor, and Hydreigon. To be honest, I thought the Plasmaclang would be able to take a few more tournaments considering the amount of EXs being played at the moment, but it still did take 4 of them, which I guess isn't too bad considering the speed of the EXs it is supposed to be countering. The limit that Klinklang has in keeping energy on the field without multiple stage 2s after suffering a KO may be what is keeping it from being ultimately successful, or maybe Rails is doing enough to keep this guy in check. Then we move on to the alternate version of Landorus Mewtwo, which is exactly the same deck but with Garbodor thrown in there as well. What this version of the deck does is cover your 2 more questionable matchups, Blastoise and Rayquaza Eels. As mentioned earlier, the Blastoise matchup isn't always difficult depending on who goes first and the strength of each start, but if they do get going faster than you will be fighting an uphill battle. However, with the inclusion of Garbodor, you can completely shut down their deck, leaving you to mop up the Pokemon left on their field while they struggle to attach any energy at all. The same goes for electric based decks, namely Rayquaza, which is one of your biggest threats when thinking about running Landorus. Shutting down their electrics with Garbatoxin brings them to a halt where they aren't going to be able to wipe your field of energy anymore, and in fact, you can do it to them instead. The original Landorus Mewtwo deck is a little bit more consistent, as you obviously don't have to include various tools and the Garbodor lines, but this version of the deck can cover a lot more bases when it comes to matchups. Another thing to note is that all 4 wins made by the Garbodor version were done in the first week of states, with no more wins in the following weeks. The reason for this? This deck got very popular. Garbodor is completely useless against Landorus Mewtwo, and as the deck got more popular, there was less need for Garbodor, explaining the decline in success. Regarding Darkrai Hydreigon, this was a bit of a surprise. The main surprise is that this won in the first week of states when Garbodor was running rampant in Landorus builds, completely shutting down what the whole deck has to offer, but regardless of this, it did squeak out a win. Hydreigon is still a strong deck when it sets up, as many decks right now can't keep up with constant healing and versatility of energy, but I can't really explain a specific reason as to why this did go all the way. One thing it does have is a way to beat down Klinklang, as it can one-shot any of the 2 Klinklangs in play with Hydreigon's Dragon Blast, but other than that, it must have been played well in the right metagame for the deck to get that win. And that is your States 2013 all summed up for you, but now for the important question of how these results affect the future format going into Battle Roads and Nationals in the next few months. So states are coming to a swift close now, and players are frantically looking for those points for Worlds invites before they have to rely on Nationals to get there. Something we do have to factor in when seeing what the new format has in store is Plasma Freeze, our brand new set coming out before the new events. The main concern here are both Thundurus and Deoxys EX, set to make a new deck when it comes to the set's release. So we have to take into consideration which of the decks now just won't be able to continue when this deck becomes apparent. Out of the top 4 winners from states, I feel that the one that may struggle is Rails, as Thundurus adds another Pokemon to the mix that can donk a Tynamo, and when you factor in that Mewtwo, Landorus and Tornadus can already donk it, it, the risk is now even higher. However, when set up, Eels can still stand its ground, so we could see that come into play again, but you need to take the big risk of starting Lone Dynamo and surviving, especially when you must win every game at Battle Roads to get points. Other than that, I think the top 4 still have a good chance with the new set coming out. The ability to donk a Squirtle is still going to be an issue when it comes to Thundurus EX, but these seem to be the risks you're going to have to take if you want to play specific decks. Landorus decks may decide to take out their Tornadus EXs in favour of other attackers such as Bouffalon that aren't lightning weak, and I feel that this deck still may have what it takes to go head to head with this new deck when it finally hits our tournaments. Overall, the format is now almost set in stone, but when Plasma Freeze comes out, we will definitely have some tweaking to do with the new trainers, and also at least one new deck to start testing against. So these results are definitely going to be helpful when it comes to deciding what to play at Nationals and Battle Roads in the last ditch attempt to get points for Worlds Invite, so I hope that I at least helped you out a little bit in getting there. And that is pretty much it from me today in a very in-depth episode. Hopefully, I've helped you in some way to get the information you need from these results, and it's good to be back doing PokeClass again. If you did enjoy this episode, then a like would be greatly appreciated, and if you do happen to be new to the channel, then please consider hitting that subscribe button for more Pokemon videos. Apart from that, that's all from me, and I hope you all have a great week.